The idea of a saddle is to enable a pipe to pass over another pipe with more or less a pipe diameter's distance. So that's our 15mm pipe, and that's our passover there. Yep. And that allows us, again, the clip itself is set. That would allow us to put insulation around that pipe if we had to. So pipe insulation, if you're going to have the thickness of an insulation around it, then you're going to have something that's going to be able to, bear in mind this will be in clips as well, that will have to saddle over the top of it, okay? So that's the idea of allowing at least a pipe diameter difference. If it specifies more than a pipe diameter difference, then that's what you would aim to achieve. So how do we form a saddle? Well, it requires some marking out, just as it did with our other bends. And it requires the use of angles, just as it did with our other bends. But the final part of it requires a bit of intuition, right? And so it takes a bit of practice. So I don't need any particular length of pipe, but what I do need to do is find the center of whatever bit of pipe I've picked up. So I'm just going to, that's 500mm, so I'm just going to measure 250mm in the middle of that. So that's on the center line of my pipe, and you can see my little mark above it, that's my 30mm, that's 2 pipe diameters. And so that's where I want the bridge, yeah? So we're trying to aim for a bridge that is, this one's a bit larger than the 30mm bridge, but we want a 30mm bridge on that one, okay? Well, to achieve that, we do the same thing, and we do exactly the same as we would if we were bending any pipe. We're going to measure back to find the angle of our first bend. Well, there's no set angle for a saddle, and this one I think has been bent at 45, and it looks like this one has been bent at 30. But it is always best to use an angle that you can find a measure back mark from on McKeown's table. You could actually, you can even use 90 degree as your first bend, but that's a bit tight for a saddle. The tighter it is, the better the saddle looks. You know, it gets closer to the pipe. That one's spreading out a bit. And the shallower the angle, the further away the start and finish of the bend gets, and it doesn't look as nice. So, but getting a 30mm saddle with a 45 degree bend is not easy. It'll always be a bit more than 30mm. So I'm going to use a 30. We'll try it with a 30mm. And 30mm, if I'm going to put in a 30 degree bend, I need to measure back 23mm using my McKeown's table. So I'm going to get my ruler again, and I've got my center line, so I'm just going to measure back 23mm. Okay, so we're now ready to do our first bend, and this one we're going to do to 30 degrees. So again, feeding it in through the back so we don't lose our mark. Mark it up with the back mark, make sure it's on the end of our former, put our guide in, and for this one, just put a bit of tension on so it doesn't move. I just need to alter my set to 30 degrees. So get your angle finder, set it up at 30. And you can see 30 is quite a shallow angle. But we need that shallow angle because if I make it any more than 30, I'm going to struggle to achieve such a low saddle. So I need to just transfer that. Okay, so that's quite a shallow angle, as you can see. But that's what we're going to use because if I use any more than that, I'm going to struggle to get the minimum height. So I'm just going to start and bend it. Just go very carefully because 30 degrees is not a very deep angle, so make sure that you just don't overdo it. And that looks about 30 degrees to me. That's fine. I'm going to take it out of that. So that's our first bend at 30 degrees. We now need to put that onto here. And we need to make sure that the center of it is right over the mark of 30 millimeters where we want to achieve it. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull these legs back around parallel to form the saddle. But at 30 degrees, it's going to mean a saddle that is going to be quite long. I'm going to put a little bit more in. I'm going to try it at 45 because it's going to look, the further away you get, the worse the saddle looks. It's looking less like a saddle and more like a humpback bridge. And what we want a saddle. So I'm going to put a bit more in it. I'm going to take it to 45. But bear in mind, we might not get our height at 45 degrees, but this is what I said. With a saddle, it's a little bit more intuitive. You've just got to think, well, what can I get away with on the machine? So I'm just going to make sure it's right back in. And if the guide won't go back in, it's usually because the pipe isn't right into the former. So make sure it is before you start. It feels a bit better now. So I'm now going to put a bit more into this, and I'm going to make it around about 45. I've set it up on the measure back using McKeon's table for a 30. So as I said, it's going to alter things slightly. But the most important thing is I want an angle that's going to, so I'm just going to pull that around a little bit more. And a touch more. And take that out again. We're going to go with that. We're going to see what that looks like. So I'm going to put that back on my mark at the top there. And you can see that's brought those legs in. So it's getting a tighter bend. That's about as far as I want to go. But you can also see that that actually isn't the center. Well, you probably can't see from there, but there's two triangles here. And they need to be equal, so I need to move my pipe along. So I've got an equal triangle here and an equal triangle here. So it actually is moving it off center line. But if I don't do that, when I come to do my bends, I'm going to have one leg slightly out of line with the other. So we need to rest it on there like that, and then we need to get our steel rule. Because what we're going to try and achieve is a parallel line like that. So our return pipe is going to be like that. So again, just as we did when we did our offset, I imagine that line passing straight over like that, and that one passing straight over there like that. But we've got to get our return bend in. And to get our return bend in, I'm going to have to go back to my McKeon's table. I'm going to have to check what sort of angle we're at now and see if we can work to an angle that's near enough. And that's not too bad. And I'm going to get my angle set and see what angle we have got. My angle finder, sorry. And so we've got an angle there of about 50 degrees. So I'm going, actually it's a bit less than 50, so I'm going to go with the 45 degree measure back mark on my McKeon's table. So I would need to measure back for 45 degrees, 35 millimeters. So get my pencil. You can see it's a bit more of a faff around, but remember where we started with our bend, okay, from the center line. So we're measuring back 45, because when we put the bend in, we want it to come round onto this leg, okay? So we need to measure back 45, and that's where we're going to bend that leg, all right? So it's going back in that way. And just like our offset, so that's our back mark, put our clamp on. Make sure it's not twisted, just like we did with our offset. Let's get my guide to hold it all together. Got to have 3 arms for this job. Put your clamp on. Okay. Got the same problem as we had with an offset, so we've got to make sure it's not twisted. So we've got to eye it through. And we're going to bend this so that we're going to form the first leg of our saddle. But if we brought it right round to parallel, we'd just be doing another offset. So we're not going to bring it right round to parallel. We're going to bring it round to the distance that we think we're going to need to form the bridge. And this is where your intuition starts to come in a bit. So we're just going to bring that round. It's this distance we're trying to achieve. So I'm just going to see what it looks like at that. I'm going to take it out again and take it back. So you've got a cranked offset. And if I'm going to put that one on there, and that's not quite getting our 30, so I'm just going to see if I can put a little bit more in it. Put it on its center line, there it does, but then we're going to get an out of parallel bend. So I'm going to put a little bit more in that. And this is the problem with saddles as opposed to the other bends. You've got to fiddle around a bit with the bends in order to get them where you want. I can also see there's a little bit of twist in it, so while it's in there, I'm going to take that bit of twist out. And I'm just going to give it a little touch more, not too much. You see how that works out on our height. And that's not too bad, and I'm going to move that again till I've got my two triangles. And I'm going to transfer my line again here, so I can see what I'm doing. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring that leg round so that it lines up with that one. So what we're after now is that. And just need to check that angle. Okay. It's now at more or less 45 with that extra bit we put in. So I'm going to do my 35 measure back on that one. Well, this one is a little bit more trial and error rather than the offsets and 90 degrees. So we'll see how it works out when I put it back in. I'm going to put it back in that way now. I'm going to find my mark that I've just put on it, which is there. But that's not my, yeah, that's my measure back mark. This is the way you have to be careful. So again, it's going to be more or less the tolerance of the machine. The tolerance of the machine is if the clamp won't let it go any further, then that's as tight as you're going to be able to achieve your bend. I'm going to put my guide back in. And what I'm aiming for now is to pull that bend so that it lines up. And on my measure back, I'm not sure whether it's going to, but we'll see. I'm just going to put a little, no, that's going to be too tight. I'm going to bring it out a bit. This is where you've got to start deciding where it's going to start bending there. That looks more like where it's going to end up parallel. So, and the further out you come, of course, the deeper this is getting. So you've got to be careful. And I'm just going to eye it through, and it still should have come out a little bit further, but what I'm trying to achieve is the saddle, but because we're trying to achieve such a shallow one, we've had to move one of the legs out to achieve it. But that's my height, and you can see I needed to come back a little bit further. And that's the tricky part. You've got to, and it's something intuitive. As you get further out, you can see where it's going to end up. It's because this leg hasn't quite ended up parallel with this one. I can put a little bit more in it because it's underbent, so that's what I'm going to do, and that will help. So I'm going to put a little bit more in that leg. By doing so, That'll bring it round a little bit. I'll put it in that way. So I'm going to put a little bit more in it. Just going to move it a little bit further out while I do it as well. But with this one, it's more a case of, once you've done your first set, it's more a case of your own eye, getting the accuracy you want, making sure there's no twists in it. Well, all I'm going to be able to do here is just straighten it a little bit. I'm not going to be able to take the change in elevation out. And I'm just going to check it for twist, and it's a little bit twisted, so I'm going to take that twist out. And that's not too bad. I'm going to put it on my job, and that will achieve my 30mm passover, but one leg is slightly longer than the other. So it takes some practice. This is the first one I've done this year, actually, because I only do them twice a year when I'm showing you lot. So yes, we need a bit of practice on saddles, because it's a much more intuitive thing than offsets and bends.